Hey, and welcome back to the channel, everybody. How are you all doing? In today's video, I'm going to teach you and I'm going to show you how I go about setting up my PID loop and my pulse width modulation parameters when I initially set up the axes for my motion sim. How I get the PID loops that I get and how I get the power levels I get. And in today's video, we're going to focus on the surge motor, but this typically is how I would set up every axis on my motion sim. The front motors, the traction loss, and the surge motor. And you would typically start with everything zeroed out, all your parameters zeroed out. And on out mode over here, you're going to make sure you're just on monitor now to begin with, okay? Select the axis you want to test. For me, it's motor 1 up here in the top left-hand corner. Start with everything zeroed out as mentioned. Because I'm using an IBT2 motor controller for my surge axis, I will make sure that my frequency pulse width modulation is set down at 25. No higher than this, or you will heat up your IBT2s. Keep them at 25 kilohertz or below, okay? The PID frequency here, I can just keep that on 3. This just can help quieten your motors down. If your motors are sitting there and they've got a really loud hum, you can use this PID frequency here to try and quieten your motors down if you wish to do that. Mine aren't too noisy, so I can leave them on about 3. So the first thing we're going to increase here is we'll go over to our step here and we'll set it at 50 so we get reasonable increments when we're adjusting our parameters here. We'll start on the PID loop. We'll start this at 100, keeping everything else zeroed out. Now, something to keep in mind with your PID loop, particularly your PID loop, your pulse width modulation minimum, okay? Bigger is not always better with these adjustments, all right? And you'll see what I'm talking about. When you go too much with some of these parameters, either on the PID loop or with pulse width modulation adjustments, you can cause adverse things to happen with your motors. You can start getting quite a dirty signal in your PID loop. For example, if you make your integral too high or your derivative too high, for example, even your proportional, things can clean up and be a lot smoother as the motor goes through its range of motion, even in proportional, if it's not too high. What you're trying to aim for here is the smoothest, strongest motion that you can get from your motors. The smoothest and strongest motion without jittering, jolting, and grainy, dirty noise from too much signal, either in the PID loop or the pulse width modulation. So let's start. I normally start my proportional at 100. Now we're going to step back down to 10 here now, okay, on the step here, so we're not increasing our parameters too much, because I wouldn't go to 50 on my minimum pulse width modulation. Maximum of 40 is where I would go there. Otherwise, I'm starting to introduce noise and it will have an adverse effect on my motors. They'll start to jitter and rock and move uncontrollably. Now, before we can adjust this, we need to increase our max here, even before our reverse, and let's take that to 100. Let's take our minimum pulse width to 20 to begin with, okay? So we've got our proportional at 100, our pulse width minimum at 20, and our max pulse width modulation at 100. Now come over to the left-hand side here, okay? Let's go for a nice safe motion, which is sine, okay? This will give us a really nice smooth sine wave, and this will start to move my surge motor if I've got enough proportional, enough minimum pulse width, and enough max. So at the moment, you can see here on the graph, it's working, but we don't have enough oomph yet to control that. Let's keep our proportional at 100. Let's up our max here to 50. Now I can feel my motors just jittering, okay? I'm going to go now and increase my proportional. Okay, you can see on the camera there, you might see a little bit of jolting. Let's increase our minimum to 30. All right, let's up our proportional. I'm not going to touch my pulse width modulation at the moment. I'm just going to keep increasing my PID loop proportional here for now. Okay, we're getting a little bit more movement. Let's up our reverse as well to match our minimum, our max pulse width modulation, should I say. Okay, let's keep increasing our max. There we go. Now we've got some movement with our pulse width modulation at 170. If I click it down, still enough. Obviously, this is just the infancy of us doing this, okay? We want much better motion than what we're seeing here. That's going to happen as we increase more power to our motors and more PID loop. So let's go higher. Let's go to 200 on our max. There we go. Now we're starting to get full range within the clip limits. Okay, we'll increase the reverse pulse width modulation as well. And now I'm going to take my minimum pulse width modulation to 40, and I won't go higher than that with my surge motor. And as you can see, that's a nice smooth action we're getting there under the sine wave. Now we can come over here, we'll leave that at 300 for now. And we can sort of fiddle with our integral. Okay. Now it doesn't take very much integral or derivative to begin to cause a bit of noise. It's already happening now. I can feel a bit of a judder. It's not as smooth. Let's add some derivative. Okay, let's add some smoothing. 5 smoothing. That's taken a bit of the jitter out. Okay, as I'm increasing these parameters. And it's getting a little bit bumpy again if I increase my integral or derivative. Now I'm going to keep increasing these just so then you guys can see that. There you go. See that? Starting to get quite a messy signaling. You can see on the sine wave here how it's degrading. The sine wave is degrading as we increase the integral and the derivative. Here on the sine wave, see that? It's starting to want to kind of become a square wave. So typically with these settings, it depends on game for game, right? This is why you can't just set this up now and leave it for all your games, because particularly integral and derivative with smoothing to help smooth the PID loop, sometimes you need to run these a little bit higher, especially the integral and derivative depending on the game. I've spoken about that in the previous video regarding Assetto Corsa. Okay, but typically when I'm first setting up my PID loop, I'll leave these down as low as sort of 1 or 2 with about 5 smoothing. Now you can see there, that's just tidied things up a little bit on the wavelength. Now let's increase our proportional. We'll just up the steps here so it's a little bit quicker. Say to 50. Right, let's take our max and our reverse up to 230. The max we can go with these are 255. You don't need to go that high. We can keep them at like 235. I can keep them at about 235. That'll give me plenty of power to my motors, but if I'm playing for a long period of time, it won't necessarily tax them too much. For the benefit of this exercise, I'm going to leave them at 225. Let's keep increasing our proportional here. And see this? Even with proportional, it's starting to get a bit messy on the wave signal here, all right? This is in the sine wave. And typically speaking, this will affect whichever one of these manual motions that you are checking your axes on, okay? That's why it's good to start with the sine wave, which is very gentle, because any noise you get in this, you're going to get when you're checking a square wave, the triangle, or ultimately the motion, which tries to mimic what would actually happen in game. So I don't like that. It's unnecessary to have that much proportional. It's causing it to be messier than it needs to be. I think I can safely keep that at about 350 for a nice smooth sine wave now. Let's check, let's do square. And you can then again go through and test if increasing the proportional That certainly speeds things up here quite significantly. In the square. Okay, let's take that back to a safe 400, okay? So unlike the sine wave, in the square wave, you can increase the proportional to get some benefits, all right? Again, this is not a game though. So once again, when you're in game, it could cause issues if you have proportional too high. Let's try our triangle. This will give us a larger sweep. Okay, now let's increase. Whoa, should have gone step down there. So integral at 50, way too much. It doesn't like that at all. Even at 22, it's too noisy. Look on the wave here, all the little square points that caused. So really, integral and derivative, you can really almost have them at 0. I think even the documentation on xsimulator.net, on xsimulator, it talks about that. Pretty much, depending on the motors you've got, you don't have to have integral or derivative even on. You could leave them at 0 and probably just operate everything from your proportional. I just have a little bit of those to make sure I'm picking up stuff that I want in game. Rightio, so that's still a little bit messy at 400 in the proportional. Now taking that down to 350 smooths it out a little bit. I wouldn't say heaps, but a little bit. 360, getting a bit of that bumping, as you can see. Go back to, go back to 350, and it just smooths it. 340, 330, no derivative, no integral, and we lose a little bit, see? I lose a little bit of the potency. So I'm going to increase those again, just a little bit, and suddenly I'll get that little bit of potency back again. And you can see that coming through here on the waveform in our monitor here. Right, now I'm going to click motion, all right? And this basically emulates as close as it can a game, all right? Let's see what this does now with these settings. It's emulating like braking, accelerating. It's more random, okay? You can see the waveform here on the monitor. It's more random. The problem with this is trying to test this is because you're getting jolted around and stuff so much, it's hard to make adjustments here as you test, all right? So I'm going to increase the proportional a bit, and straight away I get a stronger, more violent surge rail. Okay, my motor is getting more frequency there, and it's pushing me back and forwards a lot harder. It's quite nice. Just keeping in mind that this will be causing my motor to work more. This will keep causing my motor controllers to work more, which ultimately means that it's going to generate heat. Okay, which is what happens when you're in game. Then you can fiddle with your minimum pulse width modulation over here. See how low you can get this? Because this can also help clean things up a little bit, okay? If things are a little bit bumpy, if you feel like it's not if your signal or the power you're getting doesn't have a lot of integrity, you can start fiddling around with your minimum pulse width modulation. You don't want to take too much of this out though, because it will take the potency out of your axis. Straight away when I put that back to 30, it's just more potent, more violent. It's like I almost need a seatbelt. Let's try increasing our proportional here a little bit more and see what we can get. Let's go high with this. We'll go to steps of 50, 450. Much stronger again, okay, in the surge. Very strong surge now, 500. And how high will we take this before it becomes noisy though? And its movements, become compromised. You just have to keep testing it basically, see how high you can get it, remembering that the higher you take this, the more likely you are to heat up your motors and heat up your motor controllers. Right, that's a very very full-on surge now with the proportional at 600. I'm gonna back this off now because I don't want to overstress my motors, my controllers, or my frame for that matter. Okay, I'm still getting pretty nice movement at 400. Okay, I'm starting to lose some of that jolting and stuff now at 350. It's still there though. Okay, and obviously this is going to be completely different in a game. So that is how I go about setting up each of my axes based on these parameters, the pulse width modulation parameters, and the PID loop parameters. Well, I hope this video has helped you guys with a little bit of a basic setup. This is something that you need to experiment with because it's going to be different from motion sim to motion sim. But this is basically it. This is basically how you would go through checking this, keeping in mind what I said earlier. If you're using IBT2s, don't exceed 25 kilohertz in the pulse width modulation frequency. Until I see you guys in the next video, you guys stay safe, stay healthy, and take it easy out there.